What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday night. Welcome back to Bills Chat Live. I am your host, Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, doing good. Got a nice little hardware change here, so I noticed my colors look a little different, and I got to adjust coloring. But it's fresh out of the box, and I'm feeling great. I'm great. It's on a Friday night. It was a nice, easy work week for myself, and I'm just ready to talk some Bills football and get into the weekend that is coming up here. But of course, we have this show tonight first and foremost.
Well, you're still young enough, Luka, where like the enhancement in the HD level of your camera is not a bad thing. I don't think people really want to see that on me, so I'll stick with what I got. We have a big show in store for you all tonight. We are going to be doing a 53-man roster projection for these Buffalo Bills. And we wanted some help on this episode. We wanted to roundtable this thing. So we reached out to our friends, the account that we often get confused with on Twitter because we're like-minded in what we tweet. Our guy, Judge Mathis, is with us from the Air Raid Hour. How you doing tonight, Judge?
Hey, anytime I can talk about Bills football, it's a good time. So happy to be here, gentlemen.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, spending your Friday evening with us, taking some time away from the little man that is in your house now. We were talking about that a little bit. So we will get into all the conversations that the Bills are going to be having over the next few days over these 53-man roster decisions. There obviously is a football game to be played tomorrow that could impact some of those decisions. And I will tell you all what we are going to do tonight is we are going to try to simulate some of those conversations. We have deliberately not shared our thoughts too much with each other, and we're hoping to have some healthy debate tonight. And then I will also tell you, and we'll get into this a little bit more, there are some loopholes in roster construction. Example, Reed Ferguson could technically get cut and he will be brought back the very next day. It's a salary cap loophole. We are not going to worry about that. We are looking for what is the roster truly going to look like whenever they get their loopholes out of the way. So that's what we're going to go with. But before we get that off the ground tonight, gentlemen, we do want to talk about one piece of news that came out from Sean McDermott this week, and it was the decision to roll with the starters in this game coming up tomorrow against the Chicago Bears. Judge, were you pro or con on this decision?
I'm pro on this decision. I think Mike Tomlin was asked the same thing today because he kept his starters in against Atlanta in their final preseason game. And he said, hey, I think it's difficult to box without sparring. And I think that is a quote that really resonates with me as a fan. I want the players to sort of be in a rhythm, to be in a groove. And they were not in a rhythm and they were not in a groove when they were out there against the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. So to me, I'm pro putting the starters out there for a couple of drives, letting them get into a rhythm, letting them build a little bit of confidence before they head into the regular season. This is not unlike what Andy Reid does every year with Patrick Mahomes. He always plays in 2 preseason games. There's a reason why in week 0 of college football this week, USC is playing San Jose State and not UCLA. It's football. It's difficult. You need to get into a rhythm. You need to get into a groove. And sometimes you really can't do that when you're practicing against your own guys. So I'm pro the Buffalo Bills playing their starters this week, even though I know that there is a chance that somebody could get injured.
I think this is one of those things Luka and I talk about this all the time, the preseason mindset. And one of those things is like, oh, we harp so much on who the 6th receiver is. And then by October, it just does not matter anymore. Or like who the 4th tackle is. And I feel like right now we still live in this fear bunker of like, oh my God, Josh Allen can't play 2 drives. He could get hurt. And then spin it forward to Monday Night Football against the Jets, and he's going to play about 20 drives. And we're not going to be thinking at all that Josh Allen's going to get hurt. We're going to be stressing out over every play, whether it was successful or not. Luka, I think one of the confusion points, though, is they did chop off one of these preseason games. It used to go 4, and that 4th week was the one that teams would historically sit all of their starters. This really is that 3rd preseason week where I know historical reference with some of this stuff doesn't matter too much because times have changed in the NFL. But it used to be that 3rd preseason game was where the starters saw their lion's share. That is what this weekend is. So where do you fall on all this?
I'm indifferent more so. I would normally actually be on the opposite side of it. I would not want to be playing myself, but being what we saw last time they were on a field, it almost forced McDermott's hand, and they just have to do something. I think Judge pointed on it perfectly. You know, it's been said out there. You can't get live reps unless you're playing in the game, things of that nature. And it's like the only time they did it up to this point, it was very, very ugly. So you want to be kind of feeling good about yourself. You want to feel good about the rhythm that you can be in when it comes to the games that matter. And if the only time that you had a live rep, it went far from good, and you have absolutely no good mojo kind of going into that game, especially when you know you're going to be under the spotlight in a primetime game, you have to do something that just at least boosts the confidence, boosts both Dorsey's confidence and play calling, and then the actual, the individuals on the field themselves, when it comes to the offense in particular, really, to just make sure they feel good about themselves. It's like, if everything went well week 2, I would be sitting here saying, why in the world are they playing? It's if the rhythm went well, if they played a half and it looked great, say they had 2 touchdown drives and all the things went phenomenal, I also don't think they would be playing them this week either. I think they just want to make sure they have some good rhythm going. They feel good about themselves. And then when the spotlight is brightest, they can figure things out in Monday night when they're in New Jersey against the Jets. So overall, I think that really played into it. They just want to make sure they feel good. So because of that, I'll put my indifference aside and say I'm pro, but in normal circumstances, I'm a little bit more tentative with it.
Had my mic muted while I was setting up some messages. Okay, so I'll tell you the working theory I had this week while I was trying to figure out why they would do this. And I'm trying to channel my inner Sean McDermott. And here's what I came up with. You all are familiar with the Super Bowl hangover. It's the reason why teams that go to the Super Bowl historically do not have good seasons. And the genesis of that idea is they worked so hard to get on the brink of what they wanted to accomplish and just came up short. It's hard for them to start back at square one and build brick by brick to get back to that point, because it is a process. You don't just fast forward to the Super Bowl every year and take your next shot, which, by the way, annoys the hell out of me when people reference the 4 Super Bowl losses like it's a 4-game losing streak. Come on, people. They made it to 4 straight. It's incredible. But I digress. I think this is calculated by Sean McDermott. It's not to me that the offense went out and got shut out in the first half by the Steelers last week. I don't think he would be that short-sighted. My thought here is Sean McDermott might see a team that has made the playoffs the last few years, has had Super Bowl aspirations the last few years, and has had playoff heartbreakers the last few years. And maybe his read on this team is they're like, well, this is going to change this January. And in his mind, he's like, no, we cannot skip ahead to chapter 3. We are on step 1 right now. I don't feel like you all are where your heads need to be at step 1. So we're going to make sure that this process, this preseason process is important. Am I nuts, Judge? Am I overthinking this? Because I think Sean McDermott is a fantastic leader. I think he has a great pulse on his team for how they're doing. And that's kind of where I landed at the end of this week.
No, not at all. I mean, this is a guy who's process oriented, and from what we have heard from various different beat reporters over the last week and from Sean McDermott himself, it seems like some of the players might be getting a little ahead of themselves and they haven't been as process oriented as Sean McDermott would like. I mean, what did he say after the game? He said, we thought we nipped this in the bud in practice. We thought that taking guys off the field, we thought that would work. Then you heard about them making them run laps and doing all those various different things. So it's looking like Sean McDermott is not seeing what he wants to see from the team in practice. So now he wants them to prove it in a game.
All right. Well, I see Roy Collins out there. I see Jessica Tennis out there, who seems like she's ready to just hop on this show and tell us who should be the 53 player. She is dropping all kinds of knowledge in chat. So give her a thumbs up if you're out there. If you're like them watching on YouTube, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us out so much as we are trying to build up this Built in Buffalo YouTube channel. But guys, we just talked about the process. Our process tonight is about to begin, and it's the process of narrowing this Bills roster down to 53 players. Luka has made a nice color-coded sheet for you all to get. Now, here's where it starts. Maybe, Luka, you can go into explaining what the colors mean, but we're going to go position by position. And what we're really going to do at the first run through is, who are the locks? Who are we just positive is going to be on this roster? Or, if it's a situation where it's like, okay, we all agree they're going to keep 2 quarterbacks and we all agree who that second quarterback is going to be, there's no need to come back and rehash it. But those tough decisions, those Quentin Morris decisions, those Cam Lewis decisions, we might call those guys bubble players, and then we'll come back at the end to build up to that eventual 53. We are ready to roll. Luka, anything about this sheet you think the folks at home would like to know?
No, I mean, hopefully we made it nice and colorful and friendly on your screen to look at it. I took all of, a little bit of time to do this, but essentially, as you can see, I've kind of gone, it's like, hey, Josh Allen will be on the roster. James Cook will be on the roster. There are these guys are locks for the roster. So therefore we've already gone ahead, gave them the Y, which as you can see, will color them as green. If I give them an N, that means they're out. Bubble will be yellow. And there's all these different designations that we'll go through, like individuals you see over there, like Connor McGovern. There's a reason I haven't given him the Y. just because there is a conversation to be had about his health status and everything, which we will get to, eventually. But as we go here, I'll be filling out this kind of thing just so you can follow along, see where we've gone. And then, as Josh said, with a lot of the bubble guys, which will probably be more of a discussion point, we'll come back to it to fill that final 53 count and see where we all landed after some healthy discussion.
All right, well, let's start with quarterback. Josh Allen is obviously going to be there. Historically, under Sean McDermott, the Bills have only kept 2 quarterbacks. I understand there is a new rule in place that could motivate some teams to do that, but this roster is just too deep. I don't think they're going to take advantage of that rule. My read on this situation, guys, is this was a conversation for about 4 days. The bad Kyle Allen performance against the Colts, the good Matt Barkley performance against the Colts, and then 2 things happened on one night. Matt Barkley went out against the Steelers, turned the ball over 4 times. Andy got hurt. I think it's a slam dunk. It's going to be Josh Allen and Kyle Allen. Does anybody object?
I do not object. I mean, Judge, I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I will say that to me, it is interesting that the Buffalo Bills, with Matt Barkley being injured, the Buffalo Bills haven't made the decision to go out and add their Vince Young or their Jordan Palmer or their Matt Leinart, that quarterback that they always seemingly add every year to go out there and to just get beat up in the final preseason game. So when Josh Allen comes out of the game, it's going to be Kyle Allen for the remainder of that football game. So the Bills definitely want Kyle Allen to get as many reps as possible. But also, does that maybe mean the Buffalo Bills are questioning Kyle Allen? All still have some things that they want to see from Kyle Allen. The only downside to all of this, or the only caveat to all of this, is like there's no one else. Like what are they going to do? Go sign Carson Wentz? There's really nothing the Buffalo Bills can do. I don't think that they're going to make a trade for a backup quarterback at this point. I mean, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers are like, cool, we're set with Mason Rudolph as our backup. We'll trade you Mitch Trubisky. Small world, fat chance that something like that could happen. So I really do think that Kyle Allen is locked into that number 2 spot.
I think the Steelers situation is one to watch for sure. The Bills had interest in Mason Rudolph in that 18 draft. The rumor is that if they had missed out on a pick early on the quarterback, if they weren't able to get up and get whatever the guys were they liked, wherever they drew that line, that Mason Rudolph was their fallback plan. And then there's also some rumors that maybe Case Keenum doesn't make the 53 in Houston. That could be a name they consider too. But I think for now, we're going to go Allen and Allen. And we're going to move on to running back. And I think this is another fairly easy conversation. If we are going to say Reggie Gilliam is a fullback in this conversation, I think the Bills will only keep 3 running backs. I think the only path throughout preseason would have been if Darrington Evans had won that kick returner job. But for now, I feel like they're going to keep 3. And I feel like the 3 they keep are fairly obvious, but I don't want to be the one continuing to lead off the conversation. Judge, how you feeling about running back?
Yeah, running back is really interesting because obviously I think James Cook has won the role of the lead back in the Buffalo Bills backfield. I don't want to say bell cow because I don't think that's how the Buffalo Bills treat their running backs, but I think he'll be the lead back. And then I think there's a true competition behind him for who gets the second amount of carries. And I think that there is a chance that could be Latavius Murray, that Damian Harris's injury could have opened up that door for Latavius Murray. It'll be interesting to see how much run maybe Damian Harris gets in this preseason game if he's healthy and the Buffalo Bills want to get him out onto the field. I think any other year, if there was a player like Raheem Blackshear who stepped up in the preseason and had a big preseason, that they could legitimately unseat a guy like Damian Harris. I don't think his roster spot was as permanent as some people believed. Same with Latavius Murray. But there really are no younger guys who stepped up this year. Jordan Mims has looked okay. I don't think he's good enough to make an NFL roster right now. Same with Darrington Evans, and then they just signed Ty Johnson. So I think these 3 guys are locked in simply because there are really no other options on the roster.
I'm with you. It would have been fascinating to see what happened to Damian Harris with what we've seen out of Latavius Murray in camp and if Nyheim Hines was healthy. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Luka, are you aligned 3 running backs?
I actually love the point that Judge brought up there, where I think the job behind Cook really was up for grabs, and then just no individual was there to really seize the opportunity. I mean, I'm not going to include Latavius Murray in that conversation just because he's a proven vet himself, and he seems to have filled that kind of spot where him and Harris are interchangeable for the most part. So it's just kind of they got the job behind Cook by default, mainly because no one else could really step up and fill that void. Also the Hines injury, of course, made things a little bit more interesting with that running back situation. But overall, yeah, it's kind of is what it is. It's been that way, and just no one was really able to step up there, nor was I really expecting it to at that point.
Yeah, I went back and charted all the plays that Josh Allen was in the Pittsburgh game, and I included in that plays that were called back by penalty, just because those were plays the Bills intended to run. And James Cook was on the field for all but 2 plays with Josh Allen, 17 plays, 15 for James Cook. The only 2 he wasn't in on, he needed a spell, and then the 3rd and 24 give up screen to Latavius Murray. So it is interesting. You want to think, what if Damian Harris was there? But I'm right there with Judge. I don't think it's necessarily set in stone that Damian Harris is the 1B or the 2 here in this offense. I am getting a vibe that's going to be the James Cook show, and then the other 2 will just kind of fit in where they fit in. I'm going to hang on fullback. I want to have that conversation when we mention tight ends. Let's go to wide receiver, guys, because I think this is where the conversation gets interesting. And I think right now the tone of the conversation is really, will they keep 6 or will they keep 7? And that is translated to an Andy Isabella conversation. Now, Judge, I follow you on Twitter. I know you're probably higher on some guys, lower on the Bills depth chart than Luka and I are. You've been kind of tooting the horn for some of those guys down there, so I'll let you speak to it. What's your feeling right now on how the Bills are going to address this wide receiver situation?
I will say this, for some of the bottom of the depth chart guys, I've made this comment on our show. I feel like the Buffalo Bills were spoiled because their wide receiver depth chart is absolutely loaded. If we had not gone out and signed Trent Sherfield this offseason, I think Bills fans would be really clamoring for Keyshawn Johnson to make the roster. I think had we not drafted Justin Shorter, there would be a large contingent of Buffalo Bills fans who would be rooting for Dez Patman to make the roster. I think that if we didn't draft Dalton Kincaid, there would be a Marcel Aitman big slot movement coming from a lot of Bills fans, because these guys are quality NFL depth receivers, 4th, 5th guys in a rotation. I legitimately think some of these guys could latch on in other places who are shallower at the depth chart at wide receiver, especially since they're going to get an entire 3rd preseason game to show their stuff. I almost felt like the Buffalo Bills were maybe trying to hide some guys in that second game. You saw Brian Thompson out there. Brian Thompson ain't making this roster or the practice squad. I don't think Dez Patman or Keyshawn Johnson really got out there at all. But that being said, none of those guys really have a shot to make the 53-man roster, because it really is probably an 8-man battle, with the final 4 spots being between Justin Shorter, Khalil Shakir, Andy Isabella, and then the dark horse would be Tyrell Shavers, who I think will ultimately end up on the practice squad. To me, I think it's going to be Justin Shorter. I think he's locked in. I think that second preseason game, the fact that he gives you special teams value, I think he's locked into that wide receiver number 5 or number 6 role, whatever you want to call it, especially being a 5th round pick. But then it gets interesting. I personally believe the Buffalo Bills are going to use Khalil Shakir's rib injury, if it's even remotely serious, even if he's going to miss 2 or 3 weeks. I think they will use that as an excuse to IR him and stash him for the first half of the season. Then if someone gets hurt, there's a spot for him, or if somebody doesn't show up, there's a spot for him. And I think that they will ultimately end up rostering Andy Isabella. So I think they'll go with 6. I think Khalil Shakir will be the odd man out, but I think he will be on injured reserve, and he will be a guy we talk about again come mid-season.
And what that would look like for those that are not super familiar with it, Greg Thompson did a great job over at Cover One of outlining this, is the way Andy Isabella's contract status is. The Bills will probably essentially release him and then tell him to go wait in the parking lot. And then whenever the Bills are able to move Khalil Shakir to short-term IR, PUP, whatever it is, they can bring back Andy Isabella on their roster. You do have to do that transaction to get it done. You can't just move them immediately to that roster status. So don't freak out if Andy Isabella is released prior to the 29th. That could just be procedural. Luka, where do you fall on this? Because I'm right there with Judge. I think it's going to be Shakir going to, is it IR or PUP? I'm getting those two mixed up. Is it the short-term IR?
It would be short. It would be IR, designated to return. And I think you're allowed to have like 4 or 5 players that you can designate. You don't technically have to designate them. You can just make that decision after the fact.
So, yeah, I think Shakir goes to IR PUP. It gives them a little bit more runway, regular season runway, to take a look at Andy Isabella in real games. And that's how I think they're going to attack it. What do you think, Luka?
Yeah, I think the rib injury for Shakir kind of gave the Bills that out that Judge kind of outlined so perfectly. Essentially, he hasn't done anything to really show that he's taken a step forward past what he's shown us last season and then kind of going into camp, and just everything like that compounded with then some sort of injury that he's dealing with opens up that door of possibilities, like we've all said here, where they can start him on short-term IR. They got to get to the point where they can put him there. And then Isabella's kind of path to the roster is right there, clear as day. And he has shown that his value on this roster is it's credible. It's right there and it's apparent. He gives this team something that they just do not have a ton of, and that's team speed on offense. They have some guys that have a little bit of speed, but it pops when he's out there. He has the rapport with Allen. He has a rapport with this offense and understanding on what they want him to do. He has returner abilities, everything like that. It fits so well that Shakir, unfortunately, and fortunately for his situation, now finds himself in a spot where he will probably, in all of our opinions, it seems like, find himself on IR just to buy the Bills more time and figure out what they can do with then eventually when Shakir is, maybe needing to come off of IR or whatever else they need to do at that point in time. If Isabella is really proving himself on the 53, whatever it may be. I love Judge bringing up people like Keyshawn Johnson and stuff. I'm glad we do not live in a world where that is possible.
That was the drought Bills, man. We would fall in love with these guys.
Well, it's funny too, because like I picture this world being that I have such a fascination with the Cardinals and seeing Keyshawn Johnson with the Cardinals back in his like rookie year and stuff. And it's like you would never have fallen in love with him if you at least put that tape in front of people and were like, hey, this is what you actually would get on like real game days. It's not pretty. But overall, it is funny stuff that, yeah, they do have a kind of a plethora of options here at wide receiver, and they are a little bit spoiled, and Sherfield is kind of that lock and key here. He opens up so many avenues for that depth situation that it's like, yeah, you are just absolutely wealthy when it comes to depth. So I do think, and I agree with the whole idea that Shakir could open up on the short-term IR or just it's IR in general with designation to return. Then you have Shorter making the roster just because he has that special teams prowess, and you can just kind of stash him in your depth, and you have the 5th round investment that it makes sense. And Isabella becomes your 6th wide receiver going into the season after they make that transaction happen. And then from there, you kind of see where it goes and you buy yourself a little bit more time.
And it's entirely likely that these things sort themselves out as the season goes on because of injuries. I mean, the Bills will be very fortunate to not lose a wide receiver or an offensive pass catcher by whatever time Shakir comes off short-term IR. And this could just be a situation that there's always somebody going down, that spot's filled. But I think if the Bills had it their way, Khalil Shakir would have been their 3rd wide receiver coming into this season. I felt like that's the path they were looking for. And it just always felt like one step forward, one step back for Shakir. He'd make a great play, and then he'd have a drop. And then you've seen the emergence of Sherfield really got to get in there when Diggs was missing OTAs and earn the trust of Josh Allen. You knew Hardy would be involved when you saw the contract they gave him and in the speed dimension he brings. And I just think Justin Shorter is a guy that there was just no chance the Bills were ever going to cut. And I believe that because we'll get into this in a bit. I think both 7th round picks are probably going to get cut. And I just couldn't see Brandon Beane just washing his hands of all of his day 3 picks before any of them step on a field. I think we're all aligned here.
He did keep trading. He traded back a lot on that, on that last day of the draft, which I think says a lot about what he thought about the talent in the back half of that draft.
I love what he did too, getting 10 picks in the future draft. I was on with Uber on Cover One on a Spaces, and we were kicking that around on day 3, how Brandon Beane's strategy on day 3 really is to try to stockpile 7th round picks because the Bills are in a position now where these undrafted free agents don't want to come to Buffalo. It's a hard roster to make. And that's why he likes to have those 7th round picks to take those players that he would consider those priority free agents. So that's what we're going to do with wide receiver. Shakir is going to be going to IR. We're going to have Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Hardy, Sherfield, Justin Shorter, and Andy Isabella. We do have one question here from Jessica. We have not been bringing up questions as much because unfortunately it covers our guest's face, and that just seems not very hospitable.
That's okay. That's all right. I got a face for radio anyway.
Ouch, don't make us compliment you and feed your ego here. But
I'm like the guy from Home Improvement right now. You can just see my face above the
a Wilson reference.
Yeah,
I love it. All right. She wants to know, do teams normally have more offensive or defensive players on their roster, or is it usually 25 apiece?
I think it's usually within the margin of error of that, right? Like it's usually 26-24 or 25-25. It's usually you hardly ever see it get like anything like 27-23.
All right, let's talk about tight end. And I want to loop loop. I want to put Reggie Gilliam in with this conversation because he really has been working exclusively with tight ends. And then when Dawson Knox was a late scratch for that preseason game last week, he lined up a lot in 12 personnel with Dalton Kincaid. So for this conversation, if we're looking at Gilliam as a tight end, I think Knox, Kincaid, and Gilliam are locks. I think Gilliam is such a Swiss Army knife for what he can do in special teams, for him being the only fullback on the roster. He can actually carry the ball if you have an injury there and you need somebody to get you out of a game. He can be that blocking tight end. He can receive a little bit. It really comes down to, one, do they carry a fourth tight end? And two, has Jay Sternberger done anything to unseat Quentin Morris? Luka, will lead it off with you at this point. What do you think?
First and foremost, I really don't think Sternberger has done much to really unseat Morris when it comes to his position with the team. But I don't know if this is crazy to say, but I really do think that the versatility between Knox and Kincaid on top of Gilliam himself has really opened up this door where if they need to find that extra spot somewhere, Morris to me really is a bubble guy at bat. Like he is, if they need him to get to 53, he will make the roster. If he is kind of the one keeping someone else they value more off of the roster, I think he could be that guy they kind of let go and just kind of be like, hey, we'll keep you around potentially if they can bring him back. If he finds himself elsewhere, so be it. But they would accept that because maybe that's the difference between, their love of bringing Jordan Phillips back to this team and stuff of that nature, or someone else on the defensive side that they might feel like they really want to keep around for some reason. And it's because of Quentin Morris, they can't do that. If that's what it comes down to, or say a depth offensive lineman, for instance, just to add another example, it's like someone like that, if they value that kind of depth in those trenches a little bit more, which they may, in my opinion, then I think that's where Quentin Morris kind of finds himself out, just because he really does find himself to be a little bit more invaluable, or not valuable, I should say. Whereas Knox, Kincaid, and Gilliam have so much versatility to them. Like you've said, they're absolute locks. And then you'll just deal with it from there. If they need to go 3 tight end deep, Gilliam can move out there wide, or Kincaid can fill in more, whatever it needs to do. Those 3 guys are serviceable in their own right, that they can make things happen.
So I will tell you, had they kept 7 wide receivers in our experiment, I do think Quentin Morris would maybe be on the outside looking in, or a bubble guy. But I have maintained all along, I think he is much more valuable than a lot of people give him credit for. And my reasoning for that is, I think the Bills want to do everything they can to protect Dalton Kincaid from having to play that Y tight end role. I think they want to make him an exclusive F tight end. Will he line up in line? I'm sure he will. Gabe Davis did that at times last year. He'll obviously block in the running game. Every player on the field besides the quarterback will do that from time to time. But his primary role in this offense is going to be that slot receiver, that moving chess piece on offense. And if a Dawson Knox injury happens, I would not expect Kincaid to get the majority of the inline snaps. I would think that would be a Quentin Morris, just to kind of simplify what's on his plate and allow him to avoid those growing pains that tight ends often hit in year one, that comes with being an inline tight end, where it's like, okay, now I'm in line, this linebacker's blitzing. I have to decide just like that, whether I need to go out and be a hot route, whether I need to come in and block, and that you can just overload. And that's why it takes them so long to get their legs under them. So for me right now, I think Quentin Morris is more in than out, but if you guys want to say he's bubble or out, I'm totally fine making him a bubble guy for now. What do you think, Judge?
I think for now, I would leave him as a bubble guy, even though my sentiments are more towards yours. I think he is more of a lock, but at the end of the day, there is a log jam at defensive end. There is a log jam at defensive tackle. The Buffalo Bills will do what they always do year after year. And for some reason, despite the fact that they only played 2 of them on defense, are going to roster 6 linebackers. And if they don't really trust Saran Neal as Teron Johnson's backup, you might have to keep an 11th DB in Cam Lewis. So I think that there are conversations you have to have. And depending on how you value players and how those log jams settle themselves, I think Quentin Morris could find himself out, even though I would put the percentage of that at a very, very low number.
All right. So Luka, are you cool with just making him bubble for now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I had him at bubble. I wasn't
Okay.
saying he was an absolute definite out. I was just saying he is definitely a name on the desk that if they need to make a decision, all of a sudden he's kind of in that cloud of names, we'll call it. Like if you had little names on your desk, he'd be one of maybe 3 or 4 where it's like, hey, if he's the one keeping another guy out, he could potentially find his way out. But no, I'm not calling him a definite out for sure. He's absolutely bubble.
Perfect. We will save his name for later. I agree with what Lucas said about Sternberger. He was a fun name, but it never really did anything to make you think that he was better than Quentin Morris. Let's talk about offensive line. This one could be tricky. The first topic here is Connor McGovern. He did have an injury that Sean McDermott did say was more long-term than short-term. Although if you follow like guys like Thigh Doctor, I don't know if Banged Up Bills has spoken on this yet. They don't seem overly concerned, but there's just so little information now that training camp is closed and we're relying on the media reports. I don't know that I'm confident in saying he's going to start the season on IR, but Judge, I'll defer to you. Do you have a feel for that, or you have a prediction there?
When I first read the quote from Coach McDermott that Elena Getzenberg of the Buffalo News or of ESPN, shared, I was really concerned. I was like, "Oh shoot, is he out for the year? like what's going on here?" But then I reread it and I was like a little less nervous. I think it's a situation where the Buffalo Bills are probably waiting for some swelling to go down and they have to do an X-ray and all these different things. So it is concerning. But until they give further clarification, all we could do is, I guess, cross our fingers and hope, right? But luckily for the Buffalo Bills, if there was one position on the offense where someone was going to get hurt, you have Ryan Bates and you have David Edwards who could fill in at left guard. Both have done it in the league and in spurts done it well in the National Football League. So it'll be really interesting to see on Saturday, which is tomorrow, who gets the start in the game. Because my assumption is going to be David Edwards. But who knows? Possibly it is Ryan Bates. So tomorrow could tell you who the week one starter at left guard is going to be if Connor McGovern can't go.
I feel like Ryan Bates actually was better at left guard in 2021 than he was at right guard last year. So, I mean, you don't want to say an injury is a blessing in disguise, but maybe for Ryan Bates, who seems to have been pushed aside, one, by how well Torrance has played, but two, kind of a victim of his own versatility with his ability to be the backup. Maybe if they do value him over David Edwards, this is kind of that lifeline he's been waiting for. Okay, Luka, I would look at this and say, if we go on the assumption that McGovern's going to be on the 53 and he's not going to have to start off on IR, I would also think personally that David Edwards and David Quessenberry, it pained me to say that because I don't think Quessenberry is particularly good. I think those guys are locks as well, only because the Bills are out of mulligans at tackle. And I do think they had plans for Brandon Shell. I still would not rule out the Bills making a trade at tackle, but teams aren't usually overly anxious to let those guys go if they're any quality. I know Kelvin Beacham's a popular name. I feel like right now, David Quessenberry by default is going to be their swing tackle. So I would put those guys in green personally. And then I would really be pounding the table for Ryan Vandemark. And I'm also very interested in Richard Garage, but I do think he's probably the kind of player you could sneak to your practice squad. If it were up to me, I would say Quessenberry, see ya, and I would put both young tackles on this roster and just roll the dice. But they don't ask me for my opinion. But where do you fall on this, Luka? Or do you agree with my locks on the two Davids?
Yeah, so if it were me, Quessenberry would be the bubble guy, where it's like, if there is absolutely nothing else we can do with this roster, he is the 53rd man. You know what you get out of him. It's not anything exceptional, but he's familiar with everything, and depth offensive line is depth offensive line. It's hard to come by. But again, if all of a sudden someone came free on cutdown day that you liked better, and or you were able to work a trade out for a Beacham or whatever it is, then see you later, Quessenberry. But I think in a real world here, understanding how the Bills like to do things, I think Quessenberry's on the inside, looking out at this point. I would find it hard to believe. And then David Edwards, I do share the same mind with. I think his prowess is kind of there and established, where I don't see him going anywhere. I don't imagine he will be off this roster. Vandemark to me is someone that he definitely has already, I think you've seen that they are fond of him. I think he's already moved up in the ranks with them and potentially can make this roster. I would look at him as a bubble guy confidently. I don't know if I'd confidently say yes, though, unfortunately, for his sake, but I would look at Quessenberry and Edwards for sure as yeses. And then from there, it's just a very interesting conversation on what they go at from there. there's probably like 3 guys that I look at as bubble, and then the rest are kind of, I think Garage, what you said at the end there is perfect. He seems like an individual you can stash on your practice squad. So, and they're very creative with that kind of stuff. So I would imagine that's what they're going to do. And that's the play with him. But overall, yeah, I think you're only 2 at this point outside of these 6 guys up here that I would put a green on are Edwards and Quessenberry. And then from there, there's a conversation to be had on who's the bubble guy or bubble guys.
All right, Judge, I know you were the type of person who does like a 53-man roster projection every night before you go to bed. So
yes,
this is just
is what I do every night.
an open-ended question for you. Take it whatever direction you want. What are your thoughts on the whole offensive line situation?
I think if Brandon Beane is not working the phones to try to trade for a veteran offensive tackle to bring in here to provide a security blanket behind Spencer Brown and that has left tackle ability in case Deion Dawkins goes down, I think he's doing this football team a disservice, because I think if Deion Dawkins gets hurt this year or Spencer Brown falls flat in his face, that could be the end of our season. I mentioned on our show last week, everyone wants to talk about how our season's over if Josh Allen goes down. Our season could be over if Deion Dawkins goes down. Like, that is how important I think the swing tackle position is going to be. That being said, I think this is a big week for Ryan Vandemark. Joe Biscaglia, The Athletic, reported today that Ryan Vandemark has been playing most of the week at right tackle. He has performed very well in the preseason at left tackle. He has not looked so good when getting reps at right tackle. So if he can go out against the Bears this week and he can show the Buffalo Bills that he can play right tackle and he can look good, and he looked good in practice this week, which we don't know if he did or not. That's up to the coaches to decide. We're not privy to that information. I think there's a chance that Ryan Vandemark could be the swing tackle and David Quessenberry could get cut, because let's face it, he's not very good. It's his experience at this point that is keeping him on the roster, not his performance. And that would open the door for a guy like Richard Garage, or it would open up the door for a trade. But that is the onus on that is how Vandemark performs this week in practice at right tackle and in the game tomorrow at right tackle. It's going to really come down to that. But I really do think that there is a chance for Ryan Vandemark to be this team's swing tackle. And I think that Garage, Anderson, and Broker are the 3 guys who are earmarked for the practice squad.
So when you do these exercises, do you have a number of offensive linemen that you continually come away with?
If I was in charge, I would keep 10 offensive linemen, and I would have done a better job stacking some depth at tackle.
Yeah.
But I'm not the general manager. My hot take going into this offseason was we need to roster 10 offensive linemen next year. We need to develop guys. We need to have depth. That's how important protecting Josh Allen is. I've come down from that just because simply I don't think the talent is there to keep 10 guys. I did a 53-man where I kept 8. I don't like that at all. I do not like that at all. So I think the Buffalo Bills will split the difference. I think they'll keep 9. And I think Vandemark and Quessenberry will end up being those tackles. But if Vandemark makes a mark, Vandemark makes a mark tomorrow, it could spell a trade to bring in another guy because they feel confident giving him a couple of weeks to bring him up to speed with Vandemark there, or it could open the door for Garage.
All right. So it sounds like for now, we all kind of feel like Vandemark is going to make the roster we project. And it also sounds like maybe we put Quessenberry as a bubble guy, although we all kind of had that same tone, like, yeah, he could be a bubble guy, but really who's taking his spot? So maybe we just highlight 9 as rosterable for now, and then we come back to it if we're short one. Let's spin it to defense. Edge. I have been saying all along, I think Von Miller will start the season on PUP or short-term IR. I think he should start the season on PUP, short-term IR. You look at what happened with Tre'Davious White. You look at how good this football team is, and you look how old Von Miller is and where the money games fall on the schedule. There is just no reason to rush. And the Bills do have a softer start to the season with teams like the Commanders and the Raiders out of the gate. You don't want to take anybody too lightly, but they've built some good depth at edge, and it does buy them an extra roster spot. And I haven't seen anything out of Von Miller that tells me that he is ramping up for week 1 at this point. So I don't know if either one of you feels strongly different about it, but I think he's headed for sure to that short-term IR spot.
Judge, I'll let you tap in on this one, and I'll go right after you on that.
To me, I think that's where he's headed, just based on what we're seeing, the fact that he hasn't been sort of activated off the PUP list yet. I think that's where the Buffalo Bills are heading. My take has always been when Von Miller is ready, Von Miller is ready, right? Like whatever the medical professionals say, he's ready to go. He's ready to go, whether that's week 1, whether that's week 7, whether that's week 14. It appears just based on reading the tea leaves that the medical professionals are like, yeah, it's not going to be any time in the first couple of weeks of the season. That's why the Buffalo Bills are keeping him on the pup list. But don't keep him on the pup list if everyone's telling him he's good to go. If he's good to go, there's no such thing as rushing him back if the doctors okay it. Let him go on the field. But reading those tea leaves, I think that the pup list is probably where he's headed.
Yeah, I mean, so my whole thing is every time you hear about it, it seems Vaughn is overly confident that he can come back. But of course, you need to lean on your medical professionals. That's what their job is. And I do think there's a more cautious nature on how they're handling it. I don't know if it's just due to statistics of age and then in relation to the injury, whatever it is, but it does feel like there's a ton of caution with that. And it's not necessarily related to Vaughn. I think it's more of a general sense of caution. But I'm also okay with that. But I agree exactly with what Judge said. It's like, if then medical individuals are like, hey, he's good to go, and Vaughn says he feels great, you do not keep that beast caged if he thinks he's good to go. You just let it happen, and just you have to let it run its course. You have to let the player play, especially with the amount you have invested in it. I get that it's more for the end game, of course, but at the same time, it's like when you have something like that, you can't roll the dice on not playing it because there are crucial games from 1 all the way through 18, and you have to just do the best you can with the best roster you can put together. And Von Miller, of course, makes your roster a hell of a lot better. So you just have to go with it when the medical individuals say so. So yeah, I agree 100%. I just wanted to, it just really feels like there's an extra caution with it, not necessarily due to the player himself, just with some generalistic feelings about the injury and the age and things like that, which is fine. I think Von's a freak where I can easily see him coming back. I think he's just he's a medical darling. It seems like at times, like he is willing to do everything it takes to get back on the field. And that's awesome. And he's built in such a great way that he should be able to get back sooner than you would hope. But overall, I think it doesn't seem like he's absolutely ready to go week 1. There's no indication to me that makes it feel that way outside of Von himself saying he should be good when he said that a while ago. And I just don't necessarily see how he doesn't start on the PUP just because we haven't seen anything that says, oh no, there's a real chance now. It all signs point to the PUP just because medical individuals just don't feel like he's quite there yet.
Von is an optimistic guy. When he got hurt, he said he'd be ready for that Jets game like 3 weeks later. So he didn't know his ACL was torn. Unfortunately, he went to sleep, woke up, and he had the surgery. All right, so Von Miller is going to go PUP. Judge, how do you differentiate Epinesa and Basham? I think that they are both going to make the roster, unless I saw Ryan Talbot had a projection where Boogie Basham was a trade chip for them. Do you think one is ahead of the other in the pecking order? Because it felt like in training camp, Epinesa was running ahead of Basham, but now it seems like there might be some late momentum for Basham.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is like AJ Epenesa's in the contract year, right? So if you're going to trade one of them, maybe trade the guy in the contract year. But at the same time, I also think the Buffalo Bills probably have more confidence in AJ Epinesa and not Boogie Basham. So either way, I think both of them are locks unless one of them gets traded. And I think the likelihood of one getting traded is probably more likely Boogie than the other. And then that leaves you with the Shaq Lawson conundrum. And now we're talking about whether we keep in 4 or 5 defensive ends. And that's a problem because you don't know if you're keeping 4 or 5 defensive tackles. This defensive line has a lot of veteran, experienced football players. So it's going to be really interesting to see how things shake out. But I would say Epinesa and Basham are both locks, but the caveat being one of them could be traded. But we have no idea which one it could be, or if it's either like who is on the market, who's not on the market.
I'm with you. I think both of them are going to make the roster. And I do think the Shaq Lawson conversation is interesting. When I do 53-man roster projections, I find it increasingly hard to get Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips on this roster. But I also feel like the Bills are going to find a way to do that. And then Kingsley Jonathan is an interesting player. He has a unique skill set. I think he's a player that flashed a little bit last year. I still think they'll probably think they can sneak him through on waivers and get him on the practice squad. But right now, my gut tells me they will keep 5 with Vaughn on pup, and then Shaq Lawson will be there. I think Shaq Lawson could go to the practice squad. I really do. I don't think that the rest of the league values him as much as the Bills do, but I think maybe they'd worry about his reaction to that. Where are you at, Luka, with edge?
I look at one of these kind of depth edges as that trade piece. I think if they're trying to do their due diligence when it comes to offensive line that we had just discussed, and they're looking at tackles and stuff, I feel like the piece you might be able to convince teams to separate from a tackle of their own is an Epinesa or a Basham. And it's like, would you be willing to take that in order to kind of reinforce your offensive line? Absolutely. It's just if that trade doesn't happen, and we're not going to sit here and project trades like you don't do in a mock draft just because it's kind of you're just pulling it out of thin air. Yes, I agree with Judge. I agree with everything here. It feels like Ebenesa and Basham are destined for the roster as long as no trade happens. I just do circle those two individuals as kind of if I'm sitting there trying to make a move for a depth tackle or even potentially your swing tackle, it's like that is the guy I'm trying to move. It's a Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa because around the league, edges are viewed as valuable. Maybe they'll work out better in their kind of neck of the woods, whatever it might be. So I do agree with that kind of being the premium trade asset to maybe get your numbers to work right while also reinforcing something that you feel like might be not the strongest as strong as it could be at this point in time. So yeah, I look at those two guys as those individuals. I think Judge nailed that on top of the head. But overall, if we're not going to project trades here, which we shouldn't, yeah, both of them are definitely going to make the roster, I would think.
Okay, so locks for Epinesa, Bastion. Let's put Shaq Lawson on the bubble. Let's move on to defensive tackle. Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver locks. I think Tim Settle's a lock. He has been running ahead of Puna Ford every step of the way this offseason. And there was a point this offseason where I was like, wait a minute, is Puna Ford not going to make this roster? Is this going to be this year's version of OJ Howard, where I'm excited for a few months about this player they got, and now he doesn't even make the team? But I don't think that's going to happen. I think they saw how badly they missed that backup nose tackle when Daquan Jones went down. To me, this really comes down to one, do they keep 5 defensive tackles? I wouldn't, because they have some edges who can go in, kick inside, and play defensive tackle to get them out of a game if they need to, but I think they will. And two, Elianku has had a sneaky good camp and has popped both preseason games so far. Is there somebody underneath Jordan Phillips that warrants that conversation? Judge, what's your head at with defensive tackle?
Yeah, Anku's tough, right? Because, he's a sturdy guy who you feel like you can trust, but he's also one of those guys where you probably feel like you can stash him on the practice squad and call him up anytime you need him. So I don't, as well as he's played, I don't think he's in this conversation. My biggest issue is Jordan Phillips can't seem to stay healthy. Eric Washington made the comment, when Jordan Phillips is healthy, he's a dominant, he used the word dominant football player, which leads me to believe the Buffalo Bills are going to roster Jordan Phillips. My biggest issue is they keep trying to fit a square peg into a round hole playing Tim Settle at the one tech. He started the first preseason game next to Ed Oliver. I would love to see Tim Settle just slide over to where Jordan Phillips plays and be the backup 3 tech behind Ed Oliver. And then maybe you could let Jordan Phillips go if you really don't believe in his health. But I don't think the Buffalo Bills are going to do that. So I think Puna Ford could be the odd man out, but I do think the Buffalo Bills are just going to keep 5 defensive tackles.
Yeah, I'm with you for now. I don't know. Maybe Luka, if we want to speed this up, because I know we're almost on 50 minutes now, unless you have a differing opinion, maybe we do Settle Forward lock and Phillips's bubble, unless you see it differently for now.
I think the Bills are just too infatuated with the ceiling of Jordan Phillips. I think as long as he said, Washington even pointed it out. It's like when he is out there, they use the word dominant. That dominant word is not one you should take lightly. Yeah, I'm not going to go crazy on this. I just think Phillips makes the roster just solely because they are infatuated with the ceiling of play that he can provide this team. And just that alone, they feel like it's that depth that they could love and really brings them over the top with their defensive line. But I do share a mind with Judge when it's like, I wouldn't mind them maybe trying to just explore something a little bit differently, only because I'm looking at as Phillips between his time in Arizona and then returning back to Buffalo has not exactly been able to be reliable when it comes to being on the field at all. So it's like, how many times can we do this dance before we eventually just want to stop?
He had one and a half sacks week 1 against the Rams and didn't get the quarterback down the rest of the year. And he had 2 really brutal injuries where he was like frantically chasing after a quarterback and injured himself doing that. Linebacker's a fun conversation because when you look at that list, they are not long on talent at linebacker, but they're going to be long on names they keep. And all along, Judge, I had thought that AJ Klein was going to be a lock for the practice squad. It just made too much sense. He's your veteran break glass in case of emergency. And if Tyrel Dodson or Tyrel Bernard get hurt, whoever their starting middle linebacker is, you can bring up AJ Klein from the practice squad. Perfect. He's like your Xavier Rhodes from last year. But a funny thing has happened along the way. It may be that he is winning this musical game of who's going to be that musical chairs game, excuse me, of who's going to be that starting middle linebacker by default, because Tyrel Bernard has not returned to practice yet. And despite having every opportunity to just cement himself as that middle linebacker, Tyrel Dodson has kind of dropped the ball. So where are you at, Judge, now with the linebacker situation? Milano, obviously a lock. How many do they keep, and who do you think they part ways with?
I think Milano is a lock, obviously. I think Tyrel Bernard is a lock, and I think that Dorian Williams is a lock. So I think your three draft picks are locks. That's where it gets interesting, though, because I think that it could be a situation where Tyrel Dodson has played his way completely off of this roster. I understand the Buffalo Bills owe him a guaranteed $2 million, and they'd have to eat that full $2 million. But I think it's going to be AJ Klein starting the season. I think they trust between the ears AJ Klein as a middle linebacker communicating the defense, which is important. However, I don't think they trust AJ Klein, the athlete, and I think Tyrel Bernard will slowly get worked in. So I think AJ Klein is going to make this roster, and then it becomes a situation of Tyrel Dodson versus Balon Spector versus Taylor Matakevich, and now special teams gets involved, and this gets super interesting.
Well, Luka, I could see that your eyes light up when he said cut Dodson, because you were kind of saying that last week. Like, hey, if you can't win the job when it's spoon fed to you, what point do I have to even have you around?
Yeah, that was my point. Look, every opportunity he had was there. They were essentially handing him the job without handing him the job. And it just seems like every turn you come at, he is losing it and some. And it's eventually you have to almost just wonder if he has it at all. And at this point in time, I'm with Judge. It's like, hey, at what point has he even deserved to make the roster, let alone win that starting position? He hasn't proved anything. And it's like, even in his limited time where he hasn't looked awful, you just accepted the fact in years past that it was like, well, he's a depth guy. He's not relied on anyway, so on and so forth. And it's like, if he had the potential, maybe something could work. Well, now he's got the opportunity and potential there in front of him to win it. And it's just not happening by any stretch of the imagination. I love the comment that Judge made there when it comes to AJ Klein between the ears is something they trust. It's just the body and the physicality might not be there. And maybe that's something they look at and go, hey, through week 8, maybe he can give us serviceable reps. And then by that point, Tyrel Bernard can be healthy and good to go. So we get a little bit more athleticism at that position moving forward. I like that kind of philosophy and that idea. It's kind of like bringing in that sixth defenseman in hockey. You hope you can get top 4 minutes out of him in the first 25. And then it's like, okay, man, you're 37 years old. We love your experience now. Now have fun with 12 minutes for the rest of the season. Like, you're good. So
AJ Klein is our new version of Ramon Humber, who took all those snaps early on in the season before Matt Milano was ready.
Oh, there you go. What a name pull right there. I love it. But yeah, so I do like that. And then, going down the depth, Matakevich is, he makes it just solely, I think, because of his special team prowess. They love him, of course, and things of that nature. He's going to make it. I do live in a world where I don't know if they go 6 deep, and Dodson is kind of that odd man looking out. I think Bernard and Williams are both making the roster, of course, as Judge had said. Klein, I think, has somehow found his way in week 1 starting. And then all of a sudden, Matakevich is kind of your specialty, your special teams ace. So Dodson, to me, has almost played his way off the roster, like Judge said. And I've been that, like, it's just from the Pittsburgh game and on, it's all of a sudden gotten to that scenario. And it's crazy to think about because, as you said, Josh, it just seemed early on where it was, here you go, here's your plate to start. And he just threw it to the wall.
And it's funny because when he was re-signed this offseason, I put out from our Bills chat account, wow, they gave him a fully guaranteed 1-year deal. So it's not a question of if he makes the roster. It's a question of if he starts. But now you look under the hood and you're right. Like Bernard and Williams are going to be there for sure. Maybe there's a world where Tyrel Bernard starts on short-term IR. It sure doesn't sound like that's imminent, but maybe that happens. I doubt it. So now you have 3. AJ Klein has to be on the roster now. That wasn't the plan, I would say, a month ago, but now that's 4. So then you have 1 or 2 spots left. If I'm Brandon Beane, I'm looking at Tyrel Dodson. Like a month ago, I wasn't going to roster AJ Klein, and now I have to because of you. So it comes down to, do I trust you or Tyler Matakevich on special teams? Sorry, buddy. Tyler Matakevich is one of the best special teams players in the league. So then it comes down to, do I want you or Balin Spector? Well, I'm pretty much convinced that you are nothing more than a backup. And Balin Spector, I have cheap for the next 3 years to at least maybe develop into something. So I have listened to everything you guys have said, and I am right there with you. I'm totally fine with leaving Tyrel Dodson off this roster. I do think that at this point, maybe we put Matakevich on and put Spector there as like a bubble guy, as a conversation if they want to only keep 5. But yeah, I'm good with leaving Dodson off, with the amendment of, if he balls out tomorrow against Chicago, maybe this is his last ride. But everything I understand about training camp this week was it was Klein running with the ones. They're not really allowed to tell us that, so you kind of have to poke around to find out. But it sure sounds like AJ Klein was getting the lion's share of the ones this week. And then, Tyrel Dodson was on the field in the fourth quarter last week playing with Alex Austin. Speaking of Alex Austin, master of transitions here. Let's talk about cornerback. So Tre'Davious White, Taron Johnson, I would say Dane Jackson is as locky as lock gets. And so those 3, and really barring a trade, I think Benford and Elam are going to make this roster, obviously. So I think those 5, to me, where it gets interesting, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while. I know they are high on Saran Neal, and I am very confident Saran Neal will make this roster. But this is one of those should Saran Neal make this roster moments for me, because they could save north of $2 million by cutting him. And when you look at what his role is on this team, I am not convinced he's a better backup in the slot than Cam Lewis. And then when you look at his role as kind of like a big nickel defender in the past, doesn't Taylor Rapp fit that bill much better? So now you're left with a guy that covers kicks, and they have brought in so many guys like that this offseason, whether it's a Justin Shorter or a Trent Sherfield who can do it. And then you see that Andy Isabella was doing it in preseason games, and Cam Lewis can do it. So am I nuts for thinking that Saran Neal should be a bubble guy? I don't think he will be. I think he's a lock. I think they love him, but I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, if it comes down to Saran Neal or keeping another player that I'm really high on, I would be having the conversation. What do you think, Judge?
Yeah, I mean, it gets frustrating because you know exactly how the Buffalo Bills feel about Saran Neal as a nickel defender. When week 1 of the preseason, when Cam Lewis was hurt, they didn't even want to risk Teron Johnson being on the field because they didn't want their top 2 nickel defenders to be hurt, which tells you that Saran Neal is their 3rd best nickel defender. And he made some plays last week against Pittsburgh. He made a couple plays, but he always does that. He makes a couple of plays, but what you also see is him make a ton of mistakes, a ton of missed tackles, get beat a ton. So on defense, as many good plays as Saran Neal makes, he makes just as many, if not more, bad ones. He is an elite special teams player, though. Like, he is up there with the Matthew Slaters of the world and things like that. When you say he's an elite gunner, he might be the best gunner in the National Football League. He might be. When the second he gets waived by the Buffalo Bills, somebody will sign him to play special teams. So I think the Buffalo Bills would rather keep 11 DBs than cut Saran Neal. So I think Saran Neal is pretty safe at this point.
I'm with you. Luka, where are you at with cornerback? I guess it's probably going to be an uncomfortable Cam Lewis conversation, even though I'm kind of leading the parade for him making the roster.
I'm not the biggest Saran Neal fan, but I'm not going to use my fandom in this decision. I just think that, similar to how I said it with Phillips, although it's not as high of a ceiling as Phillips, that's for sure. There's nothing that proves Neal even deserves that kind of ceiling. But I think the Bills just like something about his game and the potential that's there and the ceiling of play that Neal could potentially give there based on his size and athleticism, that they just value so much that he will make the roster. I do think you bringing up the conversation on if he should make the roster is extremely valid, though. And that's kind of where I'll just leave it. I think he absolutely will make the roster at the end of the day. But overall, should he? I don't really feel so at this point. I think the points you brought up are very valid. I think, Taylor Rapp fills that big spot a lot better now. And it's like, that's kind of where you fit him in the past. So it's like, I just don't see it anymore as much so, but overall, I just think the Bills like him way too much that I'm not going to sit here and talk about how he shouldn't when inevitably he most likely will.
Let's have a Cam Lewis conversation then, because he's a guy that I think has tremendous value. He can back up at every defensive back spot on your roster. I do think he's your best backup nickel cornerback on the roster. He became a 4-phase special teams player last year. unfortunately, he is remembered for 2 really boneheaded plays last season that I think cloud the improvement he made as a valuable player. The Justin Jefferson not knocking the ball down, and then the running into the punter against Miami that extended the drive and made that game scarier than it needed to be. Judge, where are you at with Cam Lewis? Is he out or in your mind?
If I was the decision maker, I would take Cam Lewis on the roster over Saran Neal, and I would count on Justin Shorter, Trent Sherfield, Andy Isabella, Christian Benford. I count on all those people to gun. I don't think that's what the Buffalo Bills will do. I think Cam Lewis's injury makes it probably easier to cut him, and now he's flying a little bit more under the radar because he's not making any plays in the preseason. So I think he's the kind of guy you can stash comfortably on your practice squad. But there are some other Buffalo Bills corners who have made plays this preseason. Jamarcus Ingram, another UB guy, has looked good, especially at the line of scrimmage, getting his nose in there on some runs and things like that. So at the end of the day, I'm a Cam Lewis fan, despite the fact that a lot of people like to knock him because of that Justin Jefferson play. I'm a big fan of Cam Lewis, but I don't see the Buffalo Bills keeping 11 DBs. So I'm going to say he's off the roster.
All right, Luka, for now, let's make him a bubble guy. Because I think we're short right now on numbers, which is good. I mean, this is the first time I've done a roster projection and we're short.
If the Bills would just keep 5 linebackers, we wouldn't have this problem.
This would be fantastic. And then we have safety. I think that those guys, Hyde and Poyer, are probably safe. I know I'm going on a limb there, and Taylor Rapp is certainly going to make it. There was a point this offseason where I thought it was a question of whether Damar Hamlin would make it. And, putting all of the situation aside, he did tail off a little bit in his play prior to the injury, in my opinion. But man, he, to me, has popped in both preseason games, playing super aggressive. He looks fast out there. I don't think there's a world he doesn't make this team. And to me, Damar Hamlin should almost be a lock. I don't think Dean Marlowe will make this team. To me, he is a chef's kiss. Perfect. Put him on your practice squad. He's there in a pinch if you need him. If you get a couple of safeties injured or need somebody to play in a week. And then Maiden and Anderson, to me, aren't even really in the conversation at this point in time. Luka, how do you see safety?
Yeah, I think you said it well. I don't really have much to add on stuff like that. I think Damar Hamlin, we were kind of on the fence with. I think that was a we thing, not even just a you. But he's shown that, he is able to put everything behind him. He's able to still be that guy that we saw pre catastrophe, we'll call it, I guess, just health issue. And he absolutely, to me, deserves that 4th roster spot. I don't know if they'll go 5 deep. I don't think they will at this point. I think those 4 safeties are just what they're going to go into the season with overall. So I look at Marlowe being on the outside looking in, and then, Maiden and Anderson, a nice Madden safety, but he's not making the 53-man roster here. So overall, I think those guys are on the outside.
He is a really nice Madden safety.
Yeah, he's a very
actually a better Madden linebacker than Matt Milano, which says way more about Madden than it does about Maiden. All right, Luka, I'm going to give you a sec to use like little control, whatever formulas you're going to use to add up what we got as far as who's in, who's on the bubble.
Oh, I already know.
Oh, you already got it?
Come on now.
I was going to buy you some time. All right. What are we looking like right now?
So we got 23 yeses and 1 bubble on offense. Mm-hmm. And then if you can do math accordingly, this would hit you at 33. That's 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52. So we have 52 yeses currently on this roster right now. Counted it out just to make it a little bit suspenseful. And then we have a total of 4 bubble individuals.
Okay. So what's the total on offense versus defense?
23 on offense, which means that puts you at, 29 on defense, I think that is.
Well, to me, that would really tip the scales toward Quentin Morris.
Correct.
Yeah, this is correct. That's a Quentin Morris stat right there.
Yeah, that's a Quentin Morris stat. I mean, to me, that's pretty easy. So we'd go 24 offense, 26 defense then?
Correct.
Okay.
No, sorry. 24 offense, then that would put you at 20, what is that, 20?
Can't be that many because there's 3 specialists.
26 defense and 3 specialists,
Yep. Sorry, I always forget about the specialists. I just look at them as defenders because they're down there. But yes, correct.
All right, so I think we're all aligned. If it all went this way, that you would keep Quentin Morris only because you don't want to shortchange your offense. Mm-hmm. My toughest cut here is Cam Lewis. I think the Bills' toughest cut might be Shaq Lawson. All right, so we all kind of agreed on this as like a democracy. I'm going to go around the room here. If it was just your 53, what would you do different? And I know I'm just kind of throwing this question at you all here at the last minute. So I'll start first. If it was just me and I had my Brandon Beane was like, give me a roster, I would take Saran Neal off and I would put Cam Lewis on, or I would leave Saran Neal on and say, you're also an emergency linebacker. Well, we're only keeping 5 linebackers. So maybe that isn't a reason to keep Saran Neal around. I would take Saran Neal off. I'd put Cam Lewis on. And I think otherwise, I am in pretty good shape with what's going on here. Is there any, before I kick it to you guys for what you would do differently, is there any argument for Alex Austin or Nick Broker, Judge?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
not at this point. I mean, Joe Buscaglia came out with an article today, and he was talking about how Brown, the UDFA out of Akron, who came into camp late, has been practicing better than Alex Austin. So I liked Alex Austin. I thought Alex Austin could be another Dane Jackson in the sense where I think he could have gone rounds earlier, but it doesn't seem like he's made much of an impression. So I think he's going to go on to the practice squad. Nick Broker is the one where it gets interesting because Brandon Beane has been burned before. And he got burned with Ike Butker. He wanted Ike Butker on his practice squad. He loved Ike Butker. He cut Ike Butker, and he ended up a Kansas City Chief. So he eventually made his way back to Buffalo after he was waived by the Chiefs. But I think that was something that really, stuck with Brandon Beane, as well as trading a guy like Wyatt Teller, who turned out to be good, really good, all pro good, Pro Bowl good. So is there, would I be completely knocked to the ground, shocked if Nick Broker made it as the 10th offensive lineman and we kept 10? I would not be. I wouldn't be surprised if Alec Anderson made it as the 10th offensive lineman and they kept 10. That wouldn't shock me either, because offensive line is very, very valuable. I think the biggest change or the biggest shock that we could see is there are literally multiple positions where you could see the Buffalo Bills trade a roster player. There are defensive ends that could be traded. There are defensive tackles that could be traded. One of the corners could be traded. One of our guards could be traded, even though Connor McGovern's injury sort of brings that into question. Now, there's a lot of the Buffalo Bills are deep enough at receiver where I look at a roster like the Falcons and I'm like, maybe the Falcons will give up a 7th round draft pick for one of our depth wide receivers that have really played well, especially if they blow up in the last preseason game. There are a ton of players that literally could be off the roster via trade that could completely throw this whole thing into shambles. So it's a fun exercise, and really there's very few things that would shock me come next Tuesday.
All right, Luka, what would you change about what we did if it was all your world?
If it's my world, I'm looking to, and we talked about it, and this is kind of my world. I am Brandon Beane at this point. This is my desk, my table. Boogie Basham to me would be on the out. I would be trying to trade him as much as I possibly could, see what I could get for him, and I would be targeting tackles left and right. I think, even as Judge just said there, offensive line is super valuable. And honestly, you can't get good offensive line, especially depth offensive line. It's what makes it such a frustrating thing in preseason when you watch bad offensive line play. It's just there's not enough good offensive line play out there to even roster full 32 teams, it feels like. So he would be an individual I'd be looking to move, definitely for sure. And then the whole like Dodson situation, the thing that will be shocking to me is if they really do keep the individuals we talked about and then also keep Dodson on top of that, because then where are you cutting kind of the fat on the defensive side elsewhere? Because as we also went through this whole demonstration, they're light on the offensive side of the ball to begin with. So I just don't know where that situation goes, and it'll be fascinating. But yeah, I'd be looking to move Boogie Basham and stuff like that. And then I do think that there is a definite save for kind of a Nick Broker to make the roster if they want to go 10 deep. I like the idea of going 10 deep as well. I just don't think the Bills do, unfortunately. But if I were Brandon Beane, if I were, McDermott, and I was sitting in there, I would be pounding the table to go 10 deep because, again, offensive line is just so crucial, so important in this league. And you hear about it all the time, how there's just not enough good players out there when it comes to the trenches. I just said it earlier, and it's like, have as many as you can that show any sort of promise on your roster and see what you get, because you just cannot get burnt when it comes to offensive line. It will show in spades on game days.
All right, Judge, final thoughts from you. What's your last word on this? What would you do differently, if anything?
You see, I'm a little bit different. Here's the thing that I would do differently is I wouldn't have put myself in the situation where Tyrel Dodson was owed $2 million guaranteed and Tyler Matikevich's contract was fully guaranteed, because again, I'm one of those people where I understand that special teams is important, but I also understand that the special teams coach has a job to do. And that job is to get some of the depth players prepared to play special teams. If your special teams coach can't get Christian Benford to gun, if he can't get Balon Spector to play special teams, like that's an issue of your special teams coach. So yeah, I really struggle with it because we have been burned and we've lost players who have become pretty decent in the National Football League because we've had to roster special teams guys like Tywan Jones in the past, guys like Taylor Matkevich. We've lost the Wyatt Tellers of the world who've been edged off our rosters. We've lost the Isaiah Hodgins of the world who've been edged off our roster. Even Raheem Blackshear. We could have used Raheem Blackshear this year. He's off in Carolina now because he got edged off our roster because we carry so many special teams guys. So it's frustrating. I really don't know what I would do differently in this situation. I think I would try to find a way to keep Shaq Lawson on the roster. So I'd probably trade one of the defensive ends, AJ Epinesa or Biggie Basham, just because I feel like Shaq Lawson is your steady hand there at edge.
I can see that. All right, Judge, let everybody know where they can find you on socials and what day your podcast drops and what you just have going on out there in the content creation world.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at TheBillsGuys. When me and my co-host Dave Tilton, who unfortunately couldn't make it this evening, me and him, we host the Air Raid Hour every Monday night at 9 p.m. on the Cover One Sports Network. You can check us out there, just like your guys' show, live chat going the entire time. And we also do the Buffalo Bills pregame show for Cover One. So once the regular season kicks off, you can catch us an hour before kickoff every week, sort of previewing the game ahead.
Wonderful. Well, we can't thank you enough for hanging out with us tonight and doing this 53-man roster exercise. There will almost certainly be an injury or a trade that makes this entire thing irrelevant, but it was still fun to go through this with you guys. The Bills are back on the field tomorrow for a preseason game with the Chicago Bears. Tremaine Edmonds and the Chicago Bears are going to play. I don't think he's going to play, though. He's been battling an injury. Their starters are going to play. The Bills starters are going to play. That happens at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And Luka and I will be back Monday morning for Bills Chat Podcast. You can find the video form of that up on Built in Buffalo YouTube and Bills Chat YouTube. For Judge Mathis, for Luka, I am Josh McCarty, and we will see you next week on Bills Chat Live.